Good day. For today I would like to share to you a story entitled Whispers of Destiny. The war had devoured everything in its path, cities reduced to ashes, families torn apart, and lives forever altered by the relentless march of destruction. Captain Jonathan Hawthorne had seen it all. He had witnessed friends fall beside him, heard the dying cries of men who had once been full of life, and felt the weight of his country's fate pressing down on his shoulders. Jonathan had been raised in the comforts of nobility. His family's estate was far from the front lines, a place where the war was just a distant rumor, something discussed in hushed tones over dinner, but duty had called him to the trenches, and now that life of privilege seemed like a dream he could barely remember. There were days when he questioned why he continued to fight, why he continued to lead men into battles that seemed to have no end. As he lay on a makeshift cot, staring up at the cracked ceiling, he found himself wondering if this would be his final stop. Perhaps this was where his story ended, just another nameless soldier lost to the war. And then she appeared, a maid, her presence quiet yet commanding. Jonathan noticed her first by the softness of her steps, the way she moved between the rows of wounded soldiers with a calm that seemed out of place. Amidst the chaos, her hands were gentle, her touch bringing a strange comfort that he had long forgotten. He had seen many women working in the hospitals, but there was something different about her. She carried herself with a quiet strength, as if she bore a burden far heavier than her station in life should allow. He watched her from the corner of his eye, intrigued by the mystery she presented. As days turned into nights, and the war raged on just outside the manor's walls, Jonathan found himself drawn to this maid, Eliza. She was different from anyone he had ever known. Her kindness untainted by the war, her eyes reflecting a world beyond the one he had come to accept. In the midst of all the loss and despair, Jonathan began to realize that the war had not stripped him of everything. There was still something left, something fragile but undeniably real. Perhaps, he thought, destiny had not forsaken him after all. For in the darkest of times, when hope seemed like a distant memory, Eliza was the light that kept him moving forward. And deep down, he knew that their paths had crossed for a reason. As the war ground on, Jonathan's bond with Eliza deepened, each day becoming a testament to the fragile connection they had found amidst the chaos. He would often watch her move about the manor, tending to the wounded, and it struck him how she seemed untouched by the despair that clung to everything else. Eliza became his anchor in those dark times, a reminder that there was still beauty and kindness left in the world. Their conversations became a sanctuary for both of them. They spoke in stolen moments, often in hushed tones, as the night descended and the war outside quieted. If only for a while, Jonathan told her of his childhood, of his home, and the world he longed to return to. Eliza, in turn, spoke of her life of servitude, her dreams of a life beyond the walls of the manor, and her fears that such dreams would remain just that, dreams. But as the days grew colder and the war's grip tightened, Jonathan found himself clinging to the hope that somehow they would survive this. They would find a way out, away from the bloodshed, away from the expectations of society that dictated their roles. He imagined a life where they could be together, free from the chains of duty and status. It was a dream he dared to believe in, even as the war raged on around them. One fateful night, as the winds howled outside the manor, and the distant sounds of gunfire echoed through the hills. Jonathan found Eliza sitting by the fire, her face bathed in the warm glow. She looked up as he approached, her eyes reflecting a weariness he hadn't seen before. "Jonathan," she whispered as he knelt beside her, "I fear this war will never end." He took her hands in his, feeling the calluses that marked years of hard work, yet they were still the softest touch he had ever known. "It will end, Eliza," he said, though his voice wavered. "And when it does, we'll leave this place. We'll go far away from here, where no one knows our names, where we can be free." She smiled faintly, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. "I want to believe that, Jonathan, but sometimes I think that destiny is cruel." "No," he said firmly, pulling her closer. "Destiny brought us together. It won't abandon us now." But as the night wore on, destiny's grip tightened. An enemy attack came without warning, the manor's walls shaking with the force of explosions. Chaos erupted, and in the midst of it all, Jonathan's only thought was to find Eliza. He found her amidst the rubble, her dress stained with blood, her breath shallow and labored. She had been caught in the blast, her body broken, and as Jonathan gathered her in his arms, a scream tore from his throat, one that was swallowed by the roar of the battle around them. "Eliza, no, please stay with me," he begged, his voice cracking as he held her close. "You can't leave me, not like this." She looked up at him, her eyes full of pain, but also of peace. She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek. "Jonathan," she whispered, "we were never meant for this world." He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No, don't say that. We were supposed to have more time." But her strength was fading, and he could feel her slipping away from him. "I love you," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the sounds of war. "I always will." And then, with one last breath, Eliza's eyes closed, her body going limp in his arms. Jonathan held her tightly, his heart shattering as the world crumbled around him. She was gone, and with her, the fragile hope that had kept him alive through the darkest days. The war ended months later, but for Jonathan, victory felt hollow. He returned home, a decorated hero, but his heart remained on that battlefield. Buried with Eliza, he tried to move on, as society expected him to. He married a kind woman, someone his family approved of, and they built a life together. On the outside, he seemed content, a soldier who had found peace after the war. But late at night, when the house was quiet and his wife slept beside him, Jonathan's thoughts would drift back to that manor, to the sound of Eliza's laughter, to the warmth of her touch. He could never forget her, the maid who'd shown him that love could exist even in the darkest of times. Years passed, and though his life continued, a part of him remained in that moment, holding Eliza in his arms as she slipped away. He visited her grave often, a simple marker on the edge of the manor grounds, and each time he would kneel and whisper the words he had never stopped believing. "Destiny brought us together, my love, and in the end it will reunite us." Jonathan lived out his days as a good husband and a good man, but his heart never fully healed. It remained with Eliza, the woman who had shown him what it meant to love and to lose. And as the years wore on, he held on to the belief that one day, in a world beyond this one, they would find each other again. For in his heart, he knew that destiny would not fail them a second time.